Alright, so with all the chaos of student loans, AI, the difficulty of engineering courses, you may be asking yourself, should I just skip the degree and become an engineering technician instead? Today we're going to discuss some general trade-offs between the two, and you could decide which route is the better route to go. And one example of the difference I have is the construction or structural engineer planning the design and construction of a piping system for a building versus a plumber or some kind of technician putting it together and troubleshooting it. And one thing to consider is that it's kind of a broad topic what an engineer is and what an engineering technician is, because in both cases there's a very wide range of tasks done, and you could maybe even argue the semantics of certain trades jobs versus quote-unquote technician type of jobs and argue whether or not they actually fall under the category of quote-unquote engineering technician or not. But in a lot of cases, yeah, there's some overlap between what engineers and engineering technicians may perform on a production floor or in a construction site. Maybe some overlap. Every position is different. But yeah, generally speaking, engineering is focusing more on stuff that's at the desk, working at a computer, and more the technical analysis, design of the whole thing, whereas the technicians are the ones dealing with more implementation type of stuff, generally speaking. And so looking quickly at pay and at jobs and such, so engineers, the 2024 median pay is about $102,000. This is with a bachelor's degree, and BLS is typically looking at mid-career when they put these numbers. And one thing that's good, the job outlook is 9%, which is quite a bit faster than average. I mean, we have seen much higher than this with things like software engineering, where we saw, at least before all the AI stuff and all the tech chaos, that was like in the 20s. And I think cybersecurity right now is in the 20s as well. So there is a little bit of, it's not quite all the way up there, but yeah, still pretty good. And it's like we said, engineers typically perform more white-collar desk job type of work. And for mechanical engineers, this often means using tools like CAD and FEA to perform design and analysis on components and assemblies for whatever is being built. So CAD being what you put together for the dimensions of a part and which parts come together to make an assembly, and analysis using FEA, finite element analysis, is what you use to simulate breaking up the structure into pieces and then applying loads and seeing what the stresses are in each load, whether or not it might be at risk of failing, breaking, bending, stuff like that. So for electrical engineers, a lot of this desk work might often mean looking at tools like PSpice to model circuits, other tools to model things like communication systems, microelectronics, etc. And a lot of times it's stuff like MATLAB or Microsoft Office tools, Excel, programming language to crunch data, bring in data, and see what's going on in order to design or troubleshoot certain things. And depending on the discipline area, a wide range of tasks, both administrative and technical, related to the technical design and planning of the product. Engineering will have, in a lot of cases, more administrative stuff, and honestly, in a lot of cases, it is some just menial tasks or some tasks that people don't necessarily enjoy doing and aren't really technical. I don't think there's as much of that in engineering technician work, as far as I know, because they tend to be dealing more with the hands-on stuff that's directly needed. And then, so although engineering tends to be more desk administrative work, some disciplines are going to involve more going out onto the production floor, onto the testing floor, because in some cases engineers have to oversee tests or see what's going on in a test or in a manufacturing process. There may be some supervising or auditing or observing the processes, maybe some inspecting mechanical or electrical systems, make sure they were built correctly, and see what's actually going on in real life as opposed to what's going on in their simulations or in whatever they were doing in Excel and stuff, and overseeing testing like we discussed. So let's talk about pay and number of jobs and such for engineering technicians based on BLS data. So the 2024 median pay is $68,730, and you could typically get into it with an associate's degree, so usually some kind of, maybe a trade school or some kind of technology institute that will do a 2-year type of thing. And the number of jobs is, in 2024, is 38,300, and it didn't really change much between 2024 and 2034. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind, is that it's not growing, although the fact that it's not shrinking is also a good sign. It's not like a lot of this stuff, especially with AI, I think generally speaking, a lot of this stuff might be harder to outsource to AI than stuff that's on a computer that engineers do, generally speaking. So like we said, engineering technician tends to be more hands-on work on a production floor. They tend to be executing what the engineers planned and actually running the manufacturing processes, running the tests. So they're really right up in the front line of what's going on, whether you're building an aircraft or just casting large pieces of metal or building pacemakers or stuff like that. So less sitting at a desk, but definitely more physical work, which can be challenging sometimes, can be hard on the body. However, I have seen cases where technicians are hired to perform CAD or design work, and I think that is pretty common because I think some of these technology institutes will teach CAD and teach how to do drawings with geometric dimensioning and tolerancing, aka GD&T. What that is just making sure you're within a certain amount of the dimensions that are specified on the drawing. So there is less of the overseeing technical processes in this case and more actually doing them. So what's good about that, could be more mind occupying and such. I don't think there's as many technicians performing CAD as there are engineers performing CAD. I could be wrong, but as far as I've seen, that most of the people doing CAD are engineers. It might be a symptom of what we've seen where employers are overvaluing bachelor's degrees and such, which is unfortunate, because CAD, I think, absolutely is something that you should be able to just learn in a few years and do it if you needed to. But could be the kind of thing where we see a shift as employers go back to not having a lot of superfluous skills needed for jobs that are a little bit more just the technical CAD and nothing else. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, in my experience, mostly engineers are doing CAD. And in some cases, it may be difficult to climb the corporate ladder into management and stuff. And I do have a funny story where the CEO of our company visited our site a few years ago, and it was open to Q&A, and one of the technicians asked her, "So, I'm a technician. How do you suggest that I become the CEO?" And it was kind of a funny question. Just, you almost wonder, like, is he questioning how he can get into her job at some point, which, I mean, she'll probably be retired by then. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and I honestly don't remember what her answer was, although it's, yeah, interesting because engineers are more familiar with more of the high-level administrative and technical stuff. So in a lot of cases, yeah, this could be difficult for technicians climbing the corporate ladder, other than potentially like to supervisor of the technicians and such. So something to keep in mind, some companies might be more progressive in being able to just see who seems to have the most potential, which may be the engineers in some case, or maybe the technicians in some case. So yeah, definitely do some research on companies you might be looking at and whether or not technicians are viewed as being management material at those companies as they should be. So as an engineering technician, you'll often be hourly instead of salaried, and this is arguably primarily a good thing because there won't be unpaid overtime. That is something that's a problem with salaried jobs. Number of hours per week can also usually be flexible if you want, and lower pay than engineers, but little to no student loans. You're not going to an expensive university. A lot of these, I think, more 2-year colleges or 2-year technology institutes should be a lot cheaper. So it's not going to be this massive $50K student loans that a lot of people have gotten into in engineering. I've also seen cases where engineering technicians can get their engineering degree and sometimes paid for by the company, and then they move on to be an engineer for higher pay. So that is a path to potentially consider, is whether or not you just start with the basic stuff and use that opportunity to hopefully even get your degree paid for, or at least just have a really good stepping stone into the higher paying engineering jobs. So that's something to consider as well. And potentially this could even be a less competitive way to become an engineer, just because, yeah, the stepping stone thing, and you're not in this sea of engineering graduates trying to get those entry-level engineering jobs. Something to consider if you do your research and find that to be the case. And in some cases, people choose to go back to being a technician because they decide in favor of the upsides of it. I actually have heard stories of people getting their engineering degree as a technician, becoming an engineer, deciding, you know what, I miss the good old days of not being at a desk all day and dealing with administrative stuff. And so yeah, this is definitely an option as well if you wanted to try it out and go back. So which do you choose? So an engineer, you go to college, you pay for it. In some cases, maybe you need to get a lot of student loans, but usually there's higher pay, often more upward mobility, and then it's going to be more white-collar desk work as well as some administrative work. So that pretty much sums up the pros and cons of becoming an engineer. And for an engineering technician, usually less education and much cheaper, so you can actually get into the career a lot faster. Lower pay, potentially less upward mobility, more hands-on, less administrative and or desk work. So dealing a lot more just with the upfront, front line stuff on the technical floor as you need to be most of the time. So yeah, that pretty much sums up the two, and the decision that you make is based on the pros and cons of each. And so that's what we got for today. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button, and stay tuned for future videos about engineering careers and how to do well in them. I'll see you next time. Talk to you soon.